I'm Alex Michelson. This week, the issues are racial tension rising, the Derek Chauvin verdict potentially coming next week, and other incidents around the country. Plus, ending America's longest war after 20 years. What comes next for the region and for our veterans? We'll talk to a leading member of Congress at the center of all of those stories, Barbara Lee of the East Bay. Plus, insights and analysis from LA Times columnist and ESPN radio host, LZ Granderson. The Issue Is starts right now.
Broadcasting across California, California's only statewide political show. You're watching The Issue Is.
And welcome to The Issue Is. I'm Alex Michelson. Our guest this week is at the center of almost every big issue in politics this week. Barbara Lee represents the most pro-democratic district in all of California, plus 40% Democratic. She represents the East Bay. She served in elective office in one way or another since 1990. Back in 2001, she was the only member of Congress to oppose the authorization of use of force for the war in Afghanistan. And we'll get more into that in a moment. But first, Congresswoman Lee, welcome to The Issue Is for the very first time.
Thank you. Really happy to be with you. Thanks for having me.
As somebody who has worked in civil rights for most of your life, how do you describe the state of race relations right now?
In many ways, the worst of times, the best of times. We now have witnessed, I think the whole world has witnessed what African Americans have experienced for the last 401 years here in America. And that is the vestiges and the manifestations of slavery. And now we see systemic racism and structural racism and how that plays out in police murders, in the disparities and the structural racism in our healthcare system, in the wage gap, the wealth gap. We see now, and I think the rest of the country now, whether they want to agree or not, they see what white supremacy really is. And so the other night we passed H.R. 40, a commission to establish and develop reparations. And that's a significant development. And so we see legislation moving, but we also have many obstacles. We also, in terms of the worst of times, we see voter suppression and over, 250, 300 bills now being passed throughout the country to try to suppress the vote.
Yeah, so on the issue of reparations, what you're talking about is that there is the idea of let's create something to study the issue of reparations that moved out of committee, that will now move to the full House for a vote as well. That's the farthest that concept has ever gotten in the history of this country. Yeah. So
30 years.
So let's, but you know that the criticism to that is folks that say, look, I had nothing to do with slavery, so why should I pay for that? You were not enslaved. Why should you get a check for that? What does reparations actually look like to you, and what do you say to the critics?
Sure. To the critics, I say this is not about you personally. This is about a system of government, a legal system of government that enslaved Africans. So we're not talking about personal responsibility. We're talking about a system of government that enslaved people, my ancestors, who did not have a head start, did not have an equal start. You're talking about a wealth gap. Why? Because, we couldn't buy homes. Why? Because my dad, who was a veteran, couldn't receive veteran benefits for several years. And so we're talking about repairing the damage of the past. This country has to take some responsibility to do that. Otherwise, we're going to keep tinkering around the edges.
And of course, some of the specifics on how exactly that would work still need to be worked out. That's part of what this commission would look at. Right.
Yeah, that's what the commission determines. So we're not saying, give me a check or give African Americans a check, or, the commission has to do the research. They have to study it. They have to make some determinations. Of course, we did the right thing by providing reparations for Japanese Americans whose family members and who were interned in these internment camps. This is not unique to African Americans. When you look at history, when you look at this country, it's paid reparations in various forms to people who have been victims of government policies that were unjust.
Let's talk about another big issue this week. President Biden announced that on September 11th, he will end the Afghanistan war 20 years after it started. Here's some of what he said.
War in Afghanistan was never meant to be a multi-generational undertaking.
So back in 2001, you made national headlines as the only member of Congress to vote against the initial use of military force that authorized the war in Afghanistan. Here's what you wrote in the San Francisco Chronicle back then. We'll put it up on the screen. You described it as, quote, a blank check to the president to attack anyone involved in the September 11th events, anywhere in any country, without regard to our nation's long-term foreign policy, economic and national security interests, and without time limit. In granting these overly broad powers, the Congress failed its responsibility to understand the dimensions of its declaration. When you see those words now, what goes through your mind? And do you want to say, I was right?
I wish I hadn't been right, quite frankly, because we have lost so many of our brave troops, $2 trillion out of our national treasury. And I voted against that because it was a 60-word resolution that was a blank check. It gave any president, Democrat or Republican president, the authority to go to war forever. It set the stage for forever wars. So right now, in addition to being grateful and thankful that President Biden is going to begin to bring our brave troops home, I have legislation that would repeal the 2001 authorization because that's over. Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, it was specifically, supposedly for 9/11. 20 years later, why are we still there?
But in terms of Afghanistan, what especially some of the Republicans now are saying is, if we leave, we're going to leave basically a hole for more terrorism once again. Are you concerned about the future of Afghanistan? Are you concerned that we could be targeted again because of our creating a vacuum?
If we don't leave, we'll be there another 20 years and our troops will be in harm's way. Let me tell you, we have to use those tools in our toolbox in terms of diplomacy and development and provide for humanitarian assistance. And we've trained hundreds of thousands of Afghani troops who can provide the security. And of course, we'll respond if necessary. But let me tell you, keeping our troops there is not going to make the United States any safer, nor is it going to make Afghanistan any safer.
All right, let's get to know you a little bit better. Early on, you worked for Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman to run for president. We've got some video of you wearing her pearls during the inauguration of our first black female vice president, Kamala Harris. You were on hand recently when the vice president visited Oakland, your hood. Here's what you said that day.
So how did it go?
It went great. First of all, I tell you, it's such an honor to be able to welcome back home our Vice President of the United States of America.
So seeing her in that job, in Oakland especially, what does that mean for you personally?
Well, personally, it's so humbling and heartwarming. Of course, I supported Vice President Harris through all of her elections, and I know her well, and she is the daughter of the 13th Congressional District. I'm really proud of her. And I know Shirley Chisholm because, yes, I got involved in politics through the first African-American woman elected to Congress, the first African-American, and the first woman to run for the presidency, and that was Shirley Chisholm.
Is there one thing that you can think of as the most important lesson that Shirley Chisholm taught you?
To shake things up, to don't go along to get along, that these rules were not made for me. They weren't designed for women and black women and women of color. And so it's my duty and responsibility, wherever I am, whatever I'm doing, to dismantle and disrupt those systems that have created bias and racism and gender inequality.
Well, I think both your supporters and your critics would agree that you have shaken things up over the course of the years.
I'm a black woman in America.
Yeah, one more fun thing. This is called Personal Issues. This is where we put 30 seconds on the clock to get to know you a little bit better, the other side of you. So here we go. And if you could do these rapid fire. What is your favorite TV show, Congresswoman?
The news.
Favorite book?
Loving the Time of Cholera.
Favorite food?
I'm a foodie.
Anything in particular?
Soul food and Mexican food and all kinds of food.
Favorite band or musical artist?
Beyonce.
All right, and finally, who is your role model?
My mother, my late mother, my angel mother, who said that can't is not in the dictionary.
I love that. Thank you very much for sharing your views on so many things and for reminding us about the importance of shaking things up. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, great to have you on The Issue Is.
Nice being with you. Thank you.
Thank you for being a friend.
Can you believe the Golden Girls are at the center of a column about race relations? Kind of. LZ Granderson of the LA Times talks about his column, sports, and more next.
And I knew you'd be special.
And I didn't disappoint you.
A little.
The Golden Girls at the center of a column on race? Well, sort of. That column, seen here in the LA Times, is titled, "The Killing of Daunte Wright Shows This American Sickness Doesn't Stop." It is written by LZ Granderson, who is an op-ed columnist for the LA Times. He's a host on ESPN Radio in Los Angeles, an ABC News political contributor on top of about 17 other jobs. LZ Granderson, welcome back to The Issue Is.
Thank you very much for having me. And I think it's down to 15 jobs now, just so you know.
Okay, well, that's good. Balance is important. Your column talks about the Golden Girls mask that you got for coronavirus, and you use that as a way in a discussion about race. For those who haven't read it, can you explain sort of the main point?
I was noting that we were expressing ourselves with our mask, whether it was wearing a Dodgers mask or a Lakers mask. And I talked about the mask that I picked up in West Hollywood of the Golden Girls, and how much I love the Golden Girls, but also more importantly, I knew how much white people love the Golden Girls. And the reason why I pointed that out was because I wasn't just wearing that mask as a way to express, my own interest in the show, but I was also wearing the mask to help white people feel more comfortable with a 6'2" black man with dreadlocks wearing a mask, walking in and out of your stores. Now, for those who are in Los Angeles, you might think of that absolutely ridiculous. When you find yourself, as I had, in a city that's 80 to 90, 95% white, well, that dynamic is different.
We could have a verdict in the Derek Chauvin case this week. What are you expecting to see in the streets of America?
I honestly have no idea. In large part because I have no idea what the verdict is going to be. And I know that might sound ridiculous, especially those of us who watched the trial as I did, because we've been here countless times before.
And clearly also, the way that we are talking about race as Americans right now really does not seem to be working. What do you think that we all can do better? Specifically, what do you think your white brothers and sisters can do better in this conversation?
Well, I think first I would ask you, when do you think the conversation was working?
I mean, it clearly has never really been working in the history of this country, a country that started with blacks written into the Constitution as 3/5 of a person.
Exactly. So this notion of things are worse than they've ever been, this notion of things are more racist now than ever. But I think the simple fact that we're at least trying to have a conversation is a degree of progress, because for hundreds of years, we hadn't had those conversations.
What do you think people can do, though, to start that conversation? And what do you think are maybe some of the biggest misconceptions that are out there right now?
I think the first thing people can do is stop pretending they don't know what to do. Stop pretending as if you're so overwhelmed by this issue, you have no idea where to go, because we all know, you know exactly how to find out about things that you don't know. Many of us have these smartphones in our hands. Many of us have Kindles. Many of us have Netflix. Many of us are able to go to a bookstore or a library. You don't have to be in a black city. You don't even need to know a black person intimately or closely as a friend in order to get a better understanding about what this conversation is. So instead of asking, what can I do? Why don't you ask yourselves, why haven't I done it yet? Because you already know what you need to do.
Interesting point. Up next, we're going to talk more with LZ. We're going to talk about one of his other areas of expertise, sports. Fans waited a very long time to be back in the stands. They are slowly coming back and seeing a historic show here in California. The wait is over. More with LZ when we come back.
Third of the time people miss off of him. Just flash. Oh, yeah. Money shot.
This clip definitely points to the fact that fans and not cardboard cutouts are back in the stands. Justin Turner's home run caught by a fan with nachos in hand. That fan covered in cheese. Dodgers called him Nacho Man. He got a free ball and some free nachos. LZ Granderson is back with us, of course, an LA Times columnist, ESPN radio host. LZ, what do you think it means to our society for us to now have fans slowly getting back into the stands?
Well, I will answer that question by starting with the reverse. What did it do to our society when we couldn't go to sports, when we couldn't gather in those ways? That's what it means to have it back. And I don't know about you, but I know there are many days during the quarantine period, particularly last year, where I literally was wandering around trying to figure out what was I supposed to do. So I can only imagine how wonderful it must have been for those 2,000 people to be back in Staples to celebrate this amazing team that won, in my opinion, the hardest NBA championship in NBA history. But then also just see the fans also in Dodger Stadium. And hopefully we're going to be seeing the fans back at the bank. And it's so wonderful because when it was taken from us, there was a hole there. And many of us, including myself, wasn't quite sure how to fill it.
Well, and now fans are slowly going back, and what a show they have to return to. I mean, I was just thinking about the other day, like, what a time for California sports. I mean, this show broadcasting all around the state, not just here in Los Angeles. And you think of all the great players around our state: LeBron James, Steph Curry, Kawhi Leonard, Mike Trout, Mookie Betts, Aaron Donald, Carlos Vela. So much talent, historic, all-time talent, all playing now. I mean, we are in such an incredible time to be a sports fan in California.
Absolutely. And it doesn't just start there. I mean, think about it. 2 teams running deep into the NCAA tournament, UCLA women's gymnastics. We have the Agumake sisters playing for the Sparks. So, I mean, just as we sit back and are told stories of Wilt Chamberlain versus Bill Russell, in another 20 to 30 years, those are the stories from today that we're going to be telling. And you're absolutely right about, embarrassment of riches, though, in all honesty, I'm not really embarrassed about it at all.
And there is a chance, depending on what happens, that the city of Los Angeles could host the NBA Finals, the World Series, the Super Bowl, and the MLB All-Star Game all within the same year, which is pretty incredible time to be in this city. Okay, we want to get your predictions. Because maybe people take these to Vegas and make some money off of this. We try to help the folks. So let's go. Let's figure out who, LZ Granderson, is going to win the NBA Finals this year.
Man, I'm going to go with the Lakers. Considering that LeBron and AD have been out this long and we still have a top 5 defense, that tells you everything you need to know about my confidence there.
Not the Nets. How about that?
No. Did you hear me say defense?
Okay.
Just checking.
How about the World Series?
Dodgers, man. Now, our biggest problem right now with the Boys is Blue is trying to decide who's going to start because we have so many of them.
That's a good problem to have. And finally, who's going to win the Super Bowl in Los Angeles?
I said the Rams right out the gate, and not just because I'm a homer, but because I don't think people realize just how good Matthew Stafford is. So yes, I'm a complete homer here. I got the Rams as well.
LZ Granderson, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Programming note, next week on The Issue is a 4-time California Governor, Jerry Brown, will join us for the entire half hour to talk climate change, the recall, and so much more. But next, right here, we take you to the heart of Hollywood for a profile of a special organization that's tackling homelessness and community service in an unconventional way. Stay with us. More of The Issue is. Homelessness continues to be one of California's most vexing issues to solve. We so often talk about the problem, but we don't often talk about solutions. This week, we visit a center in Hollywood that's making dreams come true.
Hi.
Tanya Lopez and her son Angelo were picking out supplies at the Dream Center in Hollywood. Before living here, Tanya says she was a homeless and hopeless addict. Do you think you would be alive if it wasn't for this place?
No. I would be, sorry, I'm gonna get teary. I would have lost myself in addiction. I would have lost my son. Sorry. Yeah.
Here, she's learned how to be a sober and successful mom.
Pretty much he grew up here, you know. He's very loved here. This place shows a lot of love.
For 3-year-old Angelo, it's about the simple things. What's your favorite part of the Dream Center?
Chips.
Chips. The chips that you eat is your favorite part.
So you pretty much name any social need, we can house it right here at the Dream Center.
Pastor Matthew Barnett founded the LA Dream Center 27 years ago. It's now a 9-acre campus that offers free housing and recovery programs to more than 600 residents.
It costs $81,000 a year, I believe, to incarcerate someone, but it costs $6,000 a year for us to rehabilitate somebody. And so we get a lot of times judges will send them here for a year instead of prison.
The 1-year program has strict rules: no drugs or alcohol, no smartphones, and mandatory community service.
The nature of an addict is a taker, and so you break that through going out and serving other people.
When the pandemic began, they started a drive-through food giveaway for anyone in the public who wanted to show up. It drew volunteers, including me. It lasted for 380 straight days and more than 5 million meals. The food bank bears the name of Dodgers third baseman Justin Turner and his wife Courtney. They are among the biggest supporters of the LA Dream Center. Dodgers pitcher Clayton Kershaw and his wife Ellen built a playground for local kids. During the pandemic, they held a special Zoom school for kids. To wrap things up, I asked Tanya what we all can learn from the Dream Center.
That you're not alone, you know, that there's people out there that truly care for you and that they love you unconditionally and they are willing to help you no matter what.
If you want to volunteer, donate, or need some help yourself, you can head to dreamcenter.org. We leave you this week with music from John Mayer, Waiting on the World to Change, because the folks at the Dream Center aren't waiting. They're making it happen. I'm Elex Michelson. Thanks for watching. The Issue Is.